There's a cave on the side of a mountain outside Mecca. No windows, no door, barely tall enough to stand up straight in. You could fit maybe 3 people in there if you squeezed. And in the year 610, a 40-year-old merchant walked up that mountain alone, like he'd done dozens of times before. And something happened inside that cave that eventually changed the direction of world history. Over 1.5 billion people today trace their entire faith back to what happened in that room made of rock. Here's the part that should stop you cold. Nobody else was there. No crowd, no council of elders, no burning bush that a whole village saw from a distance. Just one man, alone, on a mountain, in the dark. And that's the question I want to sit with today. Why would the beginning of one of the largest religions on earth start with 0 witnesses, no corroboration, no second source, just Muhammad's word for it? Stick with me, because by the end of this you're going to understand why that problem is actually the entire point. And there's a detail about what happened in that cave that most people, even a lot of Muslims, never really slow down to think about. Before we get into it, let's start the way we always do. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Allah, we ask you to open our hearts before you open our minds. Ihdina siratil mustaqim. Guide us on the straight path. Let this be a reminder, not just a story. Ameen. Quick thing before we dive in, this channel is brand new, so if this kind of content is your thing, hit subscribe. It actually matters right now more than it will later. And if you want to help keep videos like this coming, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link in the description and pinned comment. No pressure, no sponsor reads, just a way to support if you're able. Okay, back to the mountain. So who is this guy climbing a mountain in the desert heat? Muhammad ibn Abdullah, 40 years old, orphaned young, lost his father before he was even born, lost his mother at 6, raised by his grandfather, then his uncle Abu Talib. By the time he's an adult, he's known around Mecca by a nickname Al-Amin, the trustworthy one. People handed him their money to hold on to. That's not a small thing in a trading city built on reputation. He marries a woman named Khadija. She's older than him, a successful businesswoman in her own right. And honestly, she's one of the most underrated figures in this entire story. We'll come back to her. But here's the detail people skip past. Muhammad had a habit. Every year, usually during the month of Ramadan, he'd leave the noise of Mecca, the idol worship, the tribal politics, the marketplace haggling, and he'd hike up Jabal an-Nur, the mountain of light, to a cave near the summit called Hira, and he'd just sit there, alone, sometimes for days. This practice has a name, Tahannuth. It roughly means spiritual retreat or devotional seclusion. Arabs before Islam weren't strangers to this. Some individuals in that culture already sensed something was off with idol worship and would go off to think, to search, to get quiet. Muhammad was one of them. So by the time we get to the famous night, this isn't some random guy stumbling into a cave for the first time. This is a routine, a rhythm he'd built for years, which actually matters a lot for what comes next, because it tells you this wasn't a man chasing a spectacle. He wasn't looking for a show. He was looking for silence. Now here's where the story gets strange, in the best way. Islamic tradition says it happened on one of the odd nights in the last 10 days of Ramadan. Many scholars point to the 27th night specifically, a night now called Laylat al-Qadr, the night of power. Muhammad is alone in the cave, like always, and according to the accounts, a figure appears, overwhelming, not gentle. The tradition describes him being seized, gripped, squeezed until he could barely breathe, and told one word, Iqra, read. Muhammad, by every early account, was not a man who could read. He responds honestly, I cannot read. The figure grips him again, squeezes again, repeats, Iqra, same answer. A third time, and then finally the words come, not as something Muhammad composes, but as something delivered through him. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, khalaqa al-insana min alaq, Iqra wa rabbuka al-akram. Read, in the name of your Lord who created man from a clinging clot. Read, and your Lord is the most generous. That's the opening of Surah Al-Alaq, chapter 96 of the Quran, the first verses ever revealed. Not a law, not a commandment, not a threat. The very first thing Islam ever says to humanity is, read, learn. Your Lord created you and taught you what you didn't know. Whatever else you think about this story, that's a wild place to start a religion. And Muhammad, by every early biography we have, doesn't respond like a man who just got great news. He runs, he's shaking, he's terrified. He doesn't think, I'm a prophet now. He thinks something has gone seriously wrong with his mind. He runs down that mountain convinced he might be losing it, convinced maybe a spirit had possessed him, which, in that culture, in that time, was a real and specific fear, not some vague anxiety. He gets home and says the now famous line to Khadija, Zammiluni, Zammiluni, wrap me, cover me. He's trembling so hard he needs to be physically wrapped in a blanket. Here's where I want you to slow down, because this next part is the hinge the entire story swings on. Khadija doesn't panic. She doesn't call him crazy. She doesn't run. She sits with him, calms him, and says something that, if you strip away the religious framing for a second, is just an incredible act of human loyalty. She tells him essentially, Allah would not let you down. You've spent your whole life being honest, taking care of your family, helping the poor, being a man of your word. God doesn't abandon someone like that. Then she does something smart. She doesn't just take his word for it emotionally. She goes and finds someone with actual religious knowledge. Her cousin, a man named Waraqa ibn Nawfal, who was elderly, blind by that point, and, this detail matters, already a Christian, already literate in scripture, already familiar with the older prophetic tradition through the Torah and the Gospel. Muhammad tells Waraqa what happened, and Waraqa's reaction isn't skepticism. He says something like, this is the same Namus, the same divine messenger who came to Moses. And then he says, the heavier part, your people are going to reject you. They're going to drive you out. If I live to see that day, I will support you. So notice what's actually happening here. Muhammad had no witnesses to the actual revelation. Nobody else was in that cave. But he wasn't left completely alone with it either. Within hours, he has his wife's steady support. And within days, he has an outside religious authority. Someone from a different faith tradition entirely, independently recognizing the pattern. Not proof in a courtroom sense, but not nothing either. Okay, let's actually sit with the hard question now. Why would Allah, if you believe this revelation was from Allah, choose to reveal it to exactly one person, in a cave, at night, with nobody else around to confirm it? Wouldn't it make more sense to do this in front of a crowd? Split the sky open over the Kaaba, get the whole city watching? Here's the thing. This isn't actually new territory in the prophetic tradition Islam sees itself as the final chapter of. This is the pattern almost every single time. Musa alayhi salam, peace be upon him, receives his call at the burning bush on Mount Tur alone. No crowd of Bani Israel standing around watching the fire, just a man and his flock. Ibrahim alayhi salam receives his call to break with his father's idols and leave everything behind, alone. No tribal council present, no audience. This is actually the exact word Waraqa ibn Nawfal used when Muhammad described what happened in the cave. He called it An-Namus al-Akbar, the same great unseen messenger who came to Musa. Waraqah wasn't inventing a comparison. He was recognizing a pattern already familiar to him from the earlier scriptures. There's a reason for this pattern, and it's not an accident of storytelling. It's baked into what revelation is supposed to demand of a person. If Allah appeared in front of a stadium of witnesses, Iman, faith, wouldn't really be Iman anymore. It would be a fact everyone's forced to accept, like gravity. You don't get moral credit for believing in gravity. The Quran itself treats belief as something that has to cost you something, has to require trust, has to be a choice, not a compulsion. There is no compulsion in religion. The Quran says in Surah Al-Baqarah, La ikraha fid din. A public spectacle that leaves no room for doubt also leaves no room for that kind of chosen faith. So think about what a witnessed revelation would even mean. If a crowd of Meccans had been standing outside Hira that night, watched Jibreel descend, watched the whole thing, you don't have Iman anymore. You have a historical event with security footage. The entire moral weight of belief evaporates. Islam seems to be built around a harder ask. Trust the testimony of a man whose entire life gave you reason to trust him. And that circles back to why Al-Amin, the nickname, actually carries real theological weight in this story, not just biographical color. The Quran itself makes this argument later. In Surah Yunus, say, if Allah had willed, I would not have recited it to you, nor would He have made it known to you. I have already lived among you a lifetime before it. Quran 10 verse 16, paraphrased in sense. The argument isn't believe me because of the miracle. It's you've known me for 40 years. You know I don't lie. Here's a detail that almost never makes it into the highlight reel version of this story, and it's honestly one of the most human parts of the whole thing. After that first revelation, there's a gap. Scholars call it al-fatra, the pause. Some accounts put it around 2.5 years, some shorter. Either way, revelation just stops. No more visits, no more angel, nothing. And Muhammad, by the accounts we have, spirals. He's described as being in real anguish during this period, at points reportedly even walking toward the edge of a cliff, only to have the angel Jibreel appear again and pull him back from that state, reassuring him he hadn't been abandoned. I bring this up because it wrecks the cartoon version of this story, where a guy gets a golden download from heaven and just calmly walks into prophethood with total confidence the whole way through. That's not what the sources describe. What they describe is a man left in silence, doubting, afraid he'd imagined the whole thing or worse, afraid he'd been rejected by whatever he'd encountered. That's a deeply human detail, and honestly it's part of what makes the eventual second revelation, Surah Al-Muddathir, chapter 74, O you wrapped in a garment, arise and warn, land so hard when it finally comes. It's not the start of the mission, it's the moment the mission gets confirmed after real doubt. Let's get physical for a second, because the location isn't just set dressing. It tells you something about the kind of retreat this was. Jabal al-Nur sits a few kilometers outside Mecca. The cave itself is near the summit. You're looking at roughly a 650-meter climb up a steep rocky path. No stairs, no shade for most of it. Today it takes the average hiker over an hour, sometimes closer to 2, and that's with modern footwear and a marked trail. In the 7th century, with none of that, this was a genuinely demanding climb, repeated regularly, by choice. The cave itself is tiny, a few meters long, barely wide enough to lie down in, oriented in a way that some note lets it face the Kaaba in Mecca below. This wasn't a comfortable retreat. It wasn't a monastery with cushions and shade. It was a deliberately hard, deliberately isolated, physically uncomfortable place to sit with your thoughts. That detail tells you Muhammad wasn't chasing a mystical experience for entertainment. Getting up there cost something. Staying there cost something. That effort is part of why the no witnesses detail hits different once you've pictured the climb. Nobody was up there filming this, because nobody else was making that climb in the middle of the night, for no reason. Here's something that I think gets lost in translation for a lot of non-Muslims approaching this story for the first time. The Quran doesn't dodge the "why should I believe you" question. It engages with it directly, repeatedly, across multiple chapters. It challenges Muhammad's contemporaries, men fluent in the most sophisticated poetic Arabic on earth, men who prized eloquence the way we might prize a national sport, to produce even one chapter like it, if they doubted its source. Surah Al-Baqarah puts it plainly. If you're in doubt about what we revealed, bring a surah like it. That's not a small dare in a culture where poetry contests were a literal public spectacle at markets like Uqaz. The argument being made isn't trust the vision, it's test the content. That's a different kind of evidentiary claim than an angel visited me, take my word for it. It shifts the burden from an unrepeatable private experience to a text anyone alive at the time could publicly scrutinize, argue with, and, in their view, try and fail to match. Whether or not you find that persuasive, it's a more interesting move than most people give it credit for. So how do you get from one terrified man wrapped in a blanket to a movement that eventually reshapes the entire Arabian Peninsula and beyond? Slowly. Painfully slowly, honestly. For the first 3 years, the message stayed private. Close family, close friends, people Muhammad trusted completely. Khadija is traditionally recognized as the first person to believe, then his cousin Ali, still a boy at the time, then his close friend Abu Bakr, whose reputation for honesty in Mecca almost mirrored Muhammad's own, and who reportedly brought several other early converts in through his own personal network of trust. Only after that quiet early phase does the message go public, and when it does, it's met with real hostility. Mecca's economy and social structure were tied up in the pilgrimage trade around the Kaaba's many idols. A message that says there's only one God threatens that economy directly, not just theologically. That's worth remembering. The resistance Muhammad faced wasn't purely a debate about metaphysics. It had teeth in the actual economics of the city. Here's where I want to bring this back around, because I don't think this is just an ancient history lesson. Every year, millions of Muslims fast during Ramadan, specifically because of what happened in that cave. The nightly prayers during Ramadan, called Taraweeh, trace their spiritual weight back to Laylatul Qadr, the night the Quran describes as better than 1,000 months. 5 times a day, when someone stands for Salah anywhere on earth, that entire practice traces a line back to a man on a mountain who nobody else saw. And I think there's something worth sitting with regardless of your own belief. The foundational moment of one of the world's major religions rests entirely on trust in a person's character, not on spectacle, not on proof that satisfies a courtroom, on a lifetime of behavior that made his word worth something before anyone had a reason to test it on matters of faith. Whether you walk away from this believing Muhammad received a divine message or believing something else entirely, the structure of the story is worth understanding on its own terms, because it explains something real about how billions of people across history have related to faith, not through certainty handed to them, but through trust extended towards someone whose life had already earned it. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. This channel's still small, still finding its footing, so a subscribe genuinely helps more right now than it will down the line. And if you want to help fund the research and time that goes into these, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link in the description and pinned comment. Totally optional, only if you're able. Drop a comment and tell me, what part of this surprised you the most? I read every single one. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you. I'll see you in the next one.